The Black Sabbath lead singer Ozzy Osbourne has died at the age of 70.
Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary frontman, whose wild voice and chaotic lifestyle made him a symbol of rock and rebellion, lived his final days far away from flashing lights and roaring crowds. He passed away in the early morning hours of July 22nd, inside his Buckinghamshire home.
I just thought he was the funniest, sweetest guy I'd ever met, because he was so vulnerable about everything. And that just attracted me to him.
The one place he considered a true refuge from the world that had both adored and devoured him for decades, Ozzy was the face of heavy metal, a man larger than life. But in the end, he was simply a husband, father, and a man struggling against a cruel disease. His death was not sudden or unexpected. It was the closing act of a long battle with late-stage Parkinson's disease. The world only learned of his passing through a carefully prepared statement released hours later. Sharon Osbourne, his wife and closest confidant for nearly all of his career.
Ozzy says he's got a Parkinsonian tremor. He does, and he was born with the PARK2 gene, which it's the best one to have.
Stepped forward to confirm the heartbreaking news. Her announcement shook the entertainment industry. For years, she had controlled every message, every detail that reached the public about Ozzy. But this time, her words revealed the deepest truth. The Osbourne family revealed that Ozzy's death was not chaotic or surrounded by confusion. Instead, it was managed with care, dignity, and preparation. He had died of respiratory failure, a direct complication of his illness. But most importantly, he died the way he had wanted at home, not in a hospital, not hooked up to endless machines. Sharon explained in a rare interview, "We were ready for this." Ozzy didn't want his last moments in a sterile hospital room. He wanted to be where he felt safe, surrounded by the people who mattered. Months before, Sharon had coordinated a private care team. Doctors, nurses, and medical aides were brought into the Osbourne household. The plan was detailed, covering not just treatment, but the emotional and spiritual side of saying goodbye. The children Amy, Kelly, and Jack were fully involved. Each of them signed the family's official statement alongside Sharon, confirming their unity in honoring Ozzy's wishes. Family meetings took place in early July, only weeks before his death. They talked openly, not just about medical details, but about the reality of what was coming. Everyone knew the time was close. Ozzy's body was failing, but his spirit was still present. According to Jack, 3 days before his death, they held a final video call. Though Ozzy could no longer speak, his eyes still carried messages. "We knew exactly what he was trying to say," Jack explained. "It wasn't confusing. It was his way of saying goodbye. In those last moments, he saved his deepest farewell for Sharon. Out of all the children, she was the one asked to sit beside him during his final hours." Sharon later shared a deeply personal letter, saying, "We kept our promises. There were no machines keeping him alive, no sudden transfers to hospitals. It was only us, and it was exactly how he wanted it." For 12 hours after his death, Ozzy's body remained in a private room, guarded from the outside world. No photographers, no fans, no outsiders, just family, silence, and grief. Later, he was taken by a private funeral service to the family's burial site, a place he had chosen years before. Unlike the grand, public memorials often given to celebrities, Ozzy's funeral was completely private. No live stream, no paparazzi, no massive crowds of fans. Sharon personally designed the entire service. The music played during the ceremony was deeply personal and released recordings Ozzy had made while recovering from his 2019 accident. The last song played was a special remix of "See You on the Other Side," which he had specifically requested a year before his death. Those present said the atmosphere was not just sad, but peaceful. It wasn't a show for the world. It was for family, for love, and for closure. To outsiders, Sharon and Ozzy's relationship looked like a never-ending storm filled with scandals, separations, and reconciliations. One of the biggest crises came when news of Ozzy's affair became public. The betrayal shattered Sharon. For a time, she separated from him, demanding that he step away from touring and performances. Ozzy voluntarily entered a treatment facility to work on his behavior and rebuild trust. What followed was months of private therapy, legal agreements, and emotional battles. Eventually, Sharon and the children agreed to give him another chance, but only under strict conditions. Documents later revealed that Ozzy signed agreements limiting his personal and financial independence. He could no longer freely interact with outsiders, handle major finances, or even appear in public without oversight. It wasn't just about rebuilding trust, it was about survival. Sharon once said, "We didn't rebuild our marriage on emotions. We rebuilt it on structure, on rules we both agreed to." This structure allowed them to heal. With time, Sharon resumed her role as his manager, controlling not only his career, but also his medical care, daily routines, and even his personal interactions. As Ozzy's health declined, the children also took on responsibilities. Kelly handled social media, carefully shaping what the public saw. Jack became his father's protector, shielding him during legal and medical processes. Amy, the eldest, preferred to stay out of the spotlight, but quietly stepped in when the family needed her. This system wasn't glamorous, but it worked. It gave Ozzy stability and allowed Sharon to focus on managing his care without being overwhelmed. Sharon herself made a huge sacrifice. She stopped almost all personal projects, media appearances, and independent work. Her life revolved around keeping Ozzy's world in order, arranging treatments, hiring specialists, handling endless legal paperwork, and ensuring he was never left without care. Sharon wasn't just a wife, she was the architect of Ozzy's career. From the moment she took over managing him after his departure from Black Sabbath, she reshaped his entire path. She chose contracts, controlled media appearances, negotiated licensing deals, and even decided what image the world would see of him. She turned his chaos into a brand. The outrageous stunts, the controversies, the unpredictable behavior, all of it was packaged and sold to the world as Ozzy. But behind every headline and performance was Sharon, making sure it didn't destroy him completely. Even in his final years, that control never stopped. She managed his finances through multiple companies, ensured his medical needs were funded, and protected the family's privacy. To the world, Ozzy was a wild man. To Sharon, he was a fragile human being who needed constant guidance. When the news of Ozzy's death became public, fans around the world mourned. Tributes poured in from fellow musicians, actors, and even political figures who recognized how deeply his music had shaped culture. But for Sharon and the children, the legacy wasn't just about music. It was about survival, resilience, and family. They had seen the private man behind the public mask, the father who tried to joke even when his body betrayed him, the husband who admitted his mistakes, the man who wanted peace after a lifetime of chaos. Sharon described him best. He was fully conscious when he passed. He knew what was happening. He left with clarity, not confusion. Ozzy Osbourne may have been a legend to the world, but to his family, he was simply theirs. And in the end, that's how he chose to go, not as a rock star, not as an icon, but as a husband and father, at home, in peace. The story of Ozzy Osbourne's death is not just about loss, it's about the complexity of love, forgiveness, and control. Sharon's influence shaped every stage of his career and every stage of his final journey. Some may criticize how much power she held, but without her, Ozzy's life might have ended much earlier. In chaos rather than calm, his legacy is not just the music that still echoes in arenas and headphones around the world. It is also the story of a family who fought through betrayal, illness, and fame, yet still managed to give him what he wanted most at the end: dignity, privacy, and peace. Ozzy Osbourne lived as a rebel, but he died as a man who finally found quiet in the home he loved. A system like the one built around Ozzy Osbourne's final years was designed to create stability and control needed in moments of deep crisis. It was not simply the usual support that a spouse might give in marriage. Instead, Sharon Osbourne managed it like a disciplined organization. Everything, whether daily care, medical treatments, or public appearances, was handled with a structured plan, rules, and strict coordination. Even moments that might seem personal, such as how he presented himself in front of others, were carefully measured and managed. What looked like a private relationship on the surface was, in reality, a tightly run system, balancing artistic freedom and personal dignity with safety and control. When Ozzy first showed signs of losing control of his movements and nervous system, his medical care immediately shifted into a special monitoring process. A complete disease management system was built inside his home. It wasn't a simple arrangement. It involved 3 separate medical groups working together. One focused on his nervous system, another handled physical rehabilitation, and the third managed his symptoms and daily needs. Sharon personally signed contracts with private medical teams, making sure that each group had trained staff working around the clock on a rotating schedule. This guaranteed that Ozzy was never left without expert care. As his condition worsened, all of his public appearances were stopped. He was only allowed to appear in short moments. If 3 conditions were met, he had to be able to sit calmly, speak clearly, and maintain enough facial control to avoid distress. These rules were not created to protect his celebrity image, but to ensure that he was safe in public and strong enough to handle outside pressure. Anytime he did attend a private event, it was under controlled conditions. A medical team was always on duty, and detailed written reports were made afterward. Even his meals and daily routines were run like a separate administrative model, carefully documented and monitored. Sharon handed the coordination of all this to a private medical advisory board that met weekly to check progress, share updates, and review results. Every document was coded, stored internally, and shared only when legally required. At this stage, monitoring his nervous system and breathing was the top priority, because any sudden decline could have been permanent and irreversible. Eventually, the decision was made to move to Switzerland. This was not a casual choice. It happened only after finishing all legal steps that allowed unlimited access to specialized medical treatment. Sharon wanted his care to be completely separate from the national health system so that every decision about his final days would remain private. She prepared legal documents that gave her advanced authority to make medical choices on his behalf, even if others disagreed. This power of attorney was one of the last steps in building a system that could handle the worst-case scenarios. When his disease reached the point where recovery was no longer possible, rehabilitation sessions were stopped. From then on, therapy focused only on comfort-reducing pain, stabilizing nerve problems, and managing muscle stiffness. Despite all this, Ozzy stayed conscious throughout his decline. He was aware of what was happening and remained strong enough to personally sign important legal papers, including his will and estate documents. The system stayed in place until the very end. Every medical report, prescription, and final conclusion was encrypted and stored. After his passing, they were officially handed over to the family's lawyer. Sharon's role as medical administrator ended only after she signed a final document confirming that every responsibility under the power of attorney had been completed. This brought to a close years of detailed, disciplined end-of-life management, a process that Sharon had overseen from beginning to end. When Ozzy finally passed away, even his funeral was handled privately. Legal documents about his burial were completed within the family and never handed into the public system beyond the official death notice. Sharon also supervised everything related to his estate, his personal belongings, property rights, and creative works. There was no conflict among the children about who would inherit what. All arrangements were completed before his death, with each child's legal representative present. Unreleased recordings and unfinished projects were officially assigned to Sharon, who was given authority to decide what to do with them. These included songs that had never been published and recordings kept only for family use. They remained private unless the legal administrator decided otherwise. When suggestions were made to build a foundation or memorial institute in his name, Sharon refused. She explained in writing that such organizations would take control away from the family. Instead, she insisted that any tributes be symbolic, private, or connected to independent projects, not run by outside groups. This decision was supported by the entire family. They wanted to keep full control over his image, his reputation, and the future of his work. In his will, Ozzy left behind a clear plan of distribution. Sharon was given full authority over administrative decisions. Kelly Osbourne was assigned to media consultation. Jack Osbourne was put in charge of digital assets, and Amy Osbourne was entrusted with non-commercial music files. This wasn't about dividing things equally, it was about giving each family member responsibilities that matched their skills and experiences. Together, they managed his legacy through internal supervision, keeping everything within the family and never handing control to outsiders. Along with his music and property, Ozzy's personal records were also protected. These included his diaries, letters, unpublished manuscripts, legal documents, and private writings covering his entire life, even up to his last days. They were stored separately from commercial assets and kept under strict confidentiality. None of them could be released without Sharon's written approval. Once everything was settled, Sharon signed a final confirmation that she had completed all responsibilities regarding his assets, will, and posthumous communications. After that, she stepped away completely. She refused to launch any new projects under the Ozzy Osbourne brand, rejected media appearances, and gave up all rights to negotiate future contracts in his name. This decision was not announced through the press or public statements. It was done through family documents, circulated quietly within their private management system. Ozzy Osbourne's journey ended exactly the way he and his family wanted, through discipline, structure, and respect. For personal choice, what remains is not only his music, but the story of how he lived and died with dignity, on his own terms. His final years were not chaotic or left to chance. They were carefully managed, step by step, with love, but also with an organized system that protected him until the end. And while fans will always remember the music, the performances, and the voice that defined a generation, those closest to him will remember something deeper: the quiet strength of a man who chose how his life and legacy should be handled, and the family that stood beside him with unwavering loyalty. If you believe his story deserves to be remembered, share it with others. Subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this, and feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts on Ozzy Osbourne's life and legacy.